Marcus Johnson walked into Valentino's grocery store in the afternoon as the sun was beginning to slope toward the horizon. Despite Buffalo's cool October weather, his forehead was still glistening with sweat from his intense workout. He wiped it off with the back of his palm and picked up a basket from the front door. The store greeted him with the familiar smell of fresh bread and the muffled hum of conversation of the few customers. Marcus had been a professional MMA fighter for 8 years. Having started his career at the age of 24, he had worked his way up the ranks, gaining respect both inside and outside the octagon. In 3 weeks, he faced an important fight, perhaps the most important fight of his career. A win guaranteed the title fight he had dreamed of since the beginning of his journey. In his gym pants pocket was a smartphone with a notes app open. Even though most people thought MMA fighters were just bare-knuckle thugs, Marcus treated his nutrition with scientific precision. He pulled out his phone and ran his eyes over the list. Chicken, rice, sweet potatoes, avocado, broccoli, eggs, oatmeal. The champion's menu, as he called it. "Hey, Marcus," came a voice from behind the cash register. Tony Valentino, the gray-haired store owner, waved him over. "How was practice today?" "Everything's going according to plan, Mr. Valentino." Marcus smiled, showing off his white teeth against his dark skin. "We're only 21 days away from the fight." "We're all rooting for you, kid. The whole neighborhood will be watching." Marcus nodded gratefully. Over the years in this Buffalo neighborhood, he had gained quite a few fans among the locals. Most treated him with respect, though sometimes he noticed the wary glances of strangers as he passed by. 6 feet and 2 inches tall, muscular build and dark skin, a combination that caused some to instinctively fear him. Marcus had long ago learned to ignore it. He moved along the aisles, methodically picking foods from the list. In the vegetable department, a young woman with a little girl caught his eye. The woman scrutinized the price tags on the organic produce, sighing softly. "Mommy, can I have these berries?" the little girl asked, pointing to a container of blueberries. "Not today, Leah," the mother replied softly. "Why don't we get a banana? They're on special this week." Marcus smiled involuntarily as he watched their conversation. He saw the couple often at the store. The woman always held herself with dignity, despite the obvious weariness in her eyes. Her daughter, a bright girl of about 8, usually helped pick out the groceries, taking her mother's errands seriously. Chanel Williams rubbed her neck tiredly. It had been a long day. First a 6-hour shift at the cafe, then 3 hours at the office where she moonlighted as a receptionist. 8-year-old Leah spent the day at school and then at an after-school group. In the evening, they still had dinner to make, homework to check, and, if they were lucky, a little reading before bed. "Mom, look, it's that fighter," Leah whispered loudly, tugging her mother's sleeve and pointing at Marcus. "Shh, sweetie, don't point," Chanel corrected her gently. "It's rude." Marcus pretended not to notice this conversation, though he was inwardly touched. Childish admiration always seemed to him to be the most sincere. Plus, he realized it was important for a dark-skinned girl in Buffalo, a city with a troubled history of race relations, to see successful members of her race. "Excuse me," Leah approached him, ignoring her mother's warning. "You're Marcus Johnson, aren't you? I've seen you on TV." Chanel hurried after her daughter. "I'm sorry, please. She's a big fan." "It's okay." Marcus squatted down to get on the same level as the girl. "Yes, I'm Marcus. And what's your name?" "Leah Williams. I'm 8 years old. Do you really know how to do that cool turnaround leg kick?" Marcus laughed. "Yeah, technically it's called a back kick, but it takes a lot of practice." "I want to learn how to fight too," Leah said seriously. "To protect my mom." Chanel smiled embarrassedly, but Marcus noticed a shadow of worry in her eyes. "You know, Leah, the most important thing in martial arts is not knowing how to fight, but knowing when not to do it," he said softly. "The real strength is in self-control." Chanel nodded gratefully at him. "See, Leah? I told you so." Marcus straightened up and smiled at Chanel. "You're the Williamses, right? I think I've seen you around here a couple times." "Yeah, we live nearby, on Maple Street." "That's a great neighborhood. I live 3 blocks from here myself." Their conversation was interrupted by the loud slamming of the front door. 3 men entered the store, talking loudly and laughing. Leading the group was a tall blond man in his 30s, dressed in a worn denim jacket. His laughter sounded harsh and unpleasant. Marcus noticed Chanel instinctively pull her daughter close to her and tense up slightly. Her reaction was almost imperceptible, but years of training had taught Marcus how to read body language. "Okay, I won't keep you," he said. "It was nice to meet you, Leah. Maybe I'll see you again." "We will," the girl exclaimed. "Mommy, can we come watch his fight?" "We'll see, honey. We're on a tight schedule." Chanel cast a quick glance at the newly arrived visitors. "Thank you for your attention to your daughter, Mr. Johnson." "Just Marcus." He smiled and took his basket and headed toward the dairy department. As he continued to pick up his groceries, Marcus watched the group of men with the corner of his eye. Something about their behavior alarmed him. Perhaps it was the professional instincts of a fighter, accustomed to assessing his opponents, or maybe it was just the life experience of a dark-skinned man who had grown up in a difficult environment. The leader of the group, the tall blond man, took a bottle of beer from the refrigerator and opened it right in the store. Tony Valentino noticed this and frowned but remained silent. Marcus knew the old man avoided conflict with problem customers after receiving threats from a similar company last year. "Hey, Scott, check this out." One of the guys nudged the blonde with his elbow and nodded toward Chanel and Leah, who were now picking out bread at the opposite end of the hall. Scott turned his head and smirked, taking another sip of his beer. Marcus could feel the anxiety building up inside him. He had no evidence that these guys were up to something bad, but his instincts were screaming danger. He forced himself to calm down. After all, public place, business day, people around. It was unlikely these guys would dare to do anything serious. Marcus moved to the cereal shelves, from where he could discreetly observe the situation and quickly intervene if necessary. Chanel seemed to sense the tension as well. She sped up her selection of groceries, whispering something to her daughter and occasionally casting concerned glances in the men's direction. "Mommy, can I have that bread?" Leah's voice boomed through the quiet store. "Yes, dear, just let's hurry. We still have to pick up your jacket from the dry cleaners in time." Marcus saw Scott whisper something to his buddies, and all 3 laughed softly. The blond man then began to move slowly toward the woman and child, pretending to just pick out groceries. His gaze, however, was focused on Chanel. Marcus placed the bag of rice in the basket and stealthily moved closer. He didn't want to give the impression that he was monitoring the situation or, heaven forbid, provoking a conflict. But something about this Scott's demeanor made him stay alert. Chanel, meanwhile, seemed determined to finish shopping as soon as possible. She took Leah's hand and headed toward the cash register, where Tony was arranging the change into boxes. "Leaving already?" The old man smiled. "What about your usual Friday night dessert?" "Next time, Mr. Valentino," Chanel smiled strained. "We have a lot to do today." Marcus was relieved. If they left now, a possible conflict would be averted. He continued his shopping, mentally compiling the menu for the coming days. But fate had it differently. As Chanel began to put the groceries on the ribbon, an elderly couple entered the store, and Tony distracted himself to greet them. At that moment, Scott happened to be right behind Chanel in line. "Take your time," he said with a feigned politeness that made Marcus shudder. "I've got all day ahead of me." "Thank you," Chanel replied briefly, not turning around and continuing to lay out her purchases. Leah eyed the stranger curiously, but her mother squeezed her hand lightly. silently urging caution. Marcus noticed two of Scott's friends strategically positioned at the exit as if blocking an escape route. The atmosphere in the store had subtly changed. Tony, busy talking to an elderly couple, seemed oblivious to the rising tension. Marcus decided to join the line, whistling softly and pretending to be fully absorbed in studying a magazine from the counter. He stood directly behind Scott, discreetly signaling to Chanel that she wasn't alone. The woman threw him a brief glance that read gratitude, but her relief was short-lived. Scott, sensing someone's presence behind him, turned around and came face to face with Marcus. For a moment there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Perhaps he'd seen Marcus's fights on TV or the internet. But then the look became cold and assessing. "In a hurry to get somewhere, buddy?" he asked with challenge in his voice. "Not particularly," Marcus replied calmly, meeting Scott's gaze. "Just waiting my turn like everyone else." Scott hummed and turned back to Chanel, who continued to lay out the groceries in a concentrated manner, trying to ignore the rising tension. "Come on, you're in such a hurry, pretty lady," he said, leaning closer to her. "How about we get acquainted? I'm Scott." Chanel replied politely but firmly. "Thanks, but no thanks. My daughter and I are in a hurry." Leah looked worried, instinctively clinging to her mother. Her big brown eyes looked warily at the stranger. "Oh, come on." Scott wasn't about to back down. "I just want to be friendly. You're a local, aren't you? Haven't seen you around this neighborhood before." "We've lived here for 3 years," Chanel replied briefly, not wanting to continue the conversation. 3 years? Wow. Scott gave her an appraising look. "And how do you like our neighborhood? Not too white for you?" Tony finally finished talking to the older couple and returned to the register. "Everything okay, Chanel?" he asked, feeling tense. "Yes, Mr. Valentino. Just run our purchases, please." Tony began scanning the merchandise, casting concerned glances back and forth at Scott and Marcus, who kept a nonchalant expression on his face, though inwardly alert. $46.19, Tony announced, finishing up. Chanel opened her wallet and started to count out the money, but Scott suddenly placed his hand on the counter beside her. "You know, I could buy you and the little girl dinner. What do you say?" "No thanks," Chanel replied firmly. "We already have plans." "What plans?" Scott didn't back down. "Why don't I join you?" "Man, she said no," Marcus calmly interjected. "Let's show some respect." Scott slowly turned to Marcus, his face contorted with anger. "And who are you, nigger? Her boyfriend?" The silence that hung in the store was almost palpable. Tony froze with his hand outstretched for money, the elderly couple at the far shelf froze, and Scott's friends pitched forward, ready to support him. Marcus kept his composure. Over the years of his career, he'd learned to control his emotions even in the most provocative situations. "No, not a guy. I just think the lady made her unwillingness to communicate clear." "Lady?" Scott snorted contemptuously. "Is that what you call them? I have other words for them in my dictionary." Chanel, pale at each word, hastily paid and picked up the packages. "Let's go, Leah," she said, trying to keep her voice sounding calm. But when they tried to step around Scott, he took a step to the side, blocking their path. "What? You won't even leave a license plate?" "Please let us pass," Chanel asked, squeezing her daughter's hand tighter. "Or what?" Scott grinned. "Call your protector?" Marcus took a deep breath. He knew the situation was heating up, but he also realized that if he gave in to the provocation, it would only make things worse. "Look, buddy, let's all stay on the winning side. They'll go about their business. We'll finish shopping, and no problem." Scott seemed to think for a moment, but then his gaze turned hard again. "Or maybe I don't want them to leave. Maybe I enjoy their company." "Scott," one of his friends called out quietly, "will you stop it?" "Shut up, Dave," Scott snapped back. "I'm just talking to the lady." Chanel tried to pass again, but Scott defiantly took a step to the side, blocking the passage again. "What's the rush?" "Mommy," Leah called out quietly, clearly startled by what was happening. "It's okay, sweetie," Chanel tried to calm her daughter, though she was on edge herself. Marcus sensed that the situation was about to get out of control. He carefully put his basket down and took a step forward. "Tony, why don't you call the police?" The shopkeeper nodded and reached for the phone under the counter, but Scott turned sharply toward him. "Don't even think about it, old man. No cops." "Okay then." Marcus tried to speak calmly and judiciously. "There's two options here. Either you back off now and let the woman with the baby go quietly, or we're really going to have a problem." "Trouble? Me?" Scott laughed and turned to his friends. "Did you hear that? I'm going to get in trouble." One of the guys was shuffling nervously from foot to foot, clearly not eager to get involved in the conflict. The other, bigger and with a shaved head, seemed ready to support his buddy. "Look," Marcus tried again, "you don't want any trouble. We're all just here to shop. Or maybe I do want trouble." Scott took a step toward Marcus. "Maybe I don't like niggers telling me what to do in my neighborhood." "It's not your neighborhood," Leah said suddenly, peering out from behind her mother. "It's a shared neighborhood. For everyone." Scott turned sharply toward the girl, and his gaze became even more malevolent. "Look at that. The little girl has an opinion too. Did Mommy teach you to pry into adult conversations?" "Don't you dare talk to my daughter," Chanel stepped forward, instinctively covering Leah with herself. "Or what?" Scott stepped closer, looming over her. "What are you going to do, you black bitch?" Tony, who up to this point had been careful not to intervene directly, thumped the counter loudly. "That's enough. There will be no such talk in my store. Scott, I'm asking you to leave." "Shut up, old man," Scott snarled, not taking his eyes off Chanel. "This is between me and them." Marcus realized the situation had reached a critical point. He slowly stepped closer. "Last chance, buddy. Step back and let them go." Scott seemed to be just waiting for that. "Or what, champ? Show me your moves?" He mimed a boxing stance, mock dancing. "Go ahead, hit me. I guarantee you'll go down so fast you won't have time to blink." Marcus didn't give in to the provocation. "I don't want to fight you. Just let people pass." "And I might want to fight," Scott grinned evilly. "I want to see if you're a real fighter or just throwing punches on TV." At that moment, Leah, startled by Scott's aggressive tone, tried to hide behind her mother and accidentally hit a rack of magazines. Several glossy publications slid to the floor. "Look what your degenerate has done!" Scott turned around sharply and without thinking, shoved Leah, who flew back to the shelf of canned goods and fell. "Leah!" Chanel shrieked, rushing to her daughter. It all happened so fast that no one had time to react. Leah sat on the floor, stunned and terrified, but seemingly unhurt physically. "What the hell are you doing?" Chanel stood up, eyes blazing with rage. "She's a child." "You should have watched your brat better," Scott snapped back. "And anyway, what the fuck are you doing in this neighborhood? Go back to your ghetto." Chanel, normally reserved and calm, couldn't take it anymore. She stepped forward sharply and shoved Scott in the chest with both hands. "Don't you dare touch my daughter! Don't you dare even look in her direction!" Scott, not expecting such a pushback, lost his balance for a moment but quickly regained it and grabbed Chanel's wrist. "Who are you raising your hands at, bitch?" That was the final straw for Marcus. In 2 steps, he was at his side and gripped Scott's forearm tightly. "Let her go. Now." Marcus's voice was quiet, but there was such steel in it that Scott froze for a moment. Then he tried to wrench his arm free, but Marcus's grip was like a vice. "You're out of line," Marcus continued in the same calm tone. "First you insult a woman, then you push a child. That's not just unacceptable, it's a crime." Scott jerked once more, and Marcus loosened his grip a little, allowing him to free himself. The man took a step back, rubbing his wrist and looking back at his friends for support. "Dave, Rick, did you see that? That nigger attacked me." The guy whose name was Dave looked unsure. "Look, Scott, why don't we just leave? I mean, we just came in for a beer." "Shut up," Scott barked. "Nobody's going to treat me like that, especially a nigger." He turned to Marcus again, pure hatred red in his eyes. "You think you can tell me what to do? In my own neighborhood?" "It's not your neighborhood," Marcus replied calmly, "and it never has been. Different people live here, and they all deserve respect." "Respect?" Scott spat contemptuously on the floor. "You know what I think of your respect?" Without waiting for an answer, he suddenly lunged forward, aiming his fist at Marcus's face. To an ordinary person, such an attack might have come as a surprise, but to a professional fighter, it was like watching slow motion. Marcus tilted his head slightly, and Scott's fist whistled a millimeter from his ear. In the same instant, he intercepted his attacker's wrist and used his own inertia to direct his movement to the side, causing him to lose his balance. Scott stumbled, but did not fall. Turning around, he attacked again, this time attempting a series of punches. Marcus blocked each of them without striking back. "Fight, coward!" Scott shouted, breathing heavily from the effort. "I won't fight you," Marcus replied, "but I won't let you hurt anyone else either." Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Tony helping Chanel and Leah move to safety behind the counter. Scott's friends were shimmying by the entrance, clearly reluctant to get involved in the conflict. "Coward!" Scott repeated, rage mixed with despair in his voice. "You think you're better than me? You think all of you are better?" He lunged forward again, this time trying to deliver a leg kick. Marcus dodged easily, and taking advantage of the moment when Scott lost his balance, neatly hooked his supporting leg. Scott fell to the floor with a thud, but immediately tried to get up, his face contorted with rage. "I'll kill you, nigger." "That's enough, Scott," Marcus said tiredly. "Look at you. You're drunk, you assaulted a woman and a child, you're making death threats. Just stop before it gets worse." "Worse? For who?" Scott laughed angrily. "For you, maybe." He abruptly grabbed a bottle from the nearest shelf and pointed the sharp shards toward Marcus, smashing it against the edge of the shelving unit. "Now, let's see what a tough fighter you are." The situation escalated dramatically. The improvised weapon in Scott's hands posed a real threat not only to Marcus, but to everyone present. "Scott, put the bottle down," Marcus said calmly but firmly. "You're out of line." "Boundaries?" Scott lunged with the broken bottle, aiming for Marcus's face. "I'll show you boundaries." Marcus barely had time to deflect, and the shards of glass slid dangerously close to his cheek. He realized he couldn't just defend himself anymore. Scott was beyond furious and posed a real threat. The next moment, as Scott swung again, Marcus took a lightning-fast step forward and intercepted his wrist and performed a classic painful hold, causing Scott to drop the bottle and fall to his knees. "Ah!" the man howled in sudden pain. "Let go, bitch." "Only if you calm down," Marcus said firmly, holding his grip. "And only if you promise not to hurt anyone else." "Fuck you!" Scott tried to break free, but each movement only made the pain in his joint worse. At that moment, one of Scott's friends, the bigger one, decided to intervene. He lunged at Marcus from behind, trying to catch him off guard. But years of training and countless sparring sessions with various opponents had made Marcus almost immune to such attacks. Without letting go of Scott's wrist, he spun around and swung his leg out, causing his attacker to stumble and crash into a rack of canned goods. Dozens of cans tumbled to the floor with a clinking sound. "Rick!" Scott shouted. "Dave, do something!" But Dave, seeing how easily Marcus had handled their friend, only retreated toward the exit, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I'm out, dude. You started this on your own." Traitor! Scott hissed, but you could already hear the desperation in his voice. Marcus applied a little more pressure to his wrist. Last chance. Will you calm down? Scott, finally realizing the hopelessness of his situation, nodded slowly. Hell yeah, let go. Marcus gently let go of his hand, ready to react to another attack at any moment. But Scott seemed to have lost his fighting fervor. He sat on the floor, rubbing his wrist and casting angry glances. Let's get out of here, he muttered, rising to his feet. This store is shit anyway. But as he turned to leave, he saw the road blocked by 2 police officers with their guns drawn. Police! Everybody stay where you are. Tony slowly stepped out from behind the counter with his hands up. Officers, I called for you. This man, he pointed at Scott, attacked a woman and child and threatened my customer. One of the police officers, a stocky man with graying temples, nodded. We'll handle this. Everyone stay where you are and one at a time explain what happened here. Chanel, still hugging a trembling Leah, stepped forward. This man stalked us, insulted us, and pushed my daughter. And this one, Scott pointed at Marcus, attacked me, almost broke my arm. After you tried to hit him with a broken bottle, Tony interjected. I have security cameras, officers. They recorded the whole thing. Scott turned pale, only now seeming to realize the seriousness of his situation. We'll take the tape, the policeman nodded. In the meantime, everyone stays here. I'll need your IDs. While his colleague gathered the IDs, the first officer took Marcus aside. You're Marcus Johnson, right? The fighter? Yes, sir, Marcus nodded. You do realize that with your training, the use of force could qualify as the use of a weapon. I understand, Marcus replied seriously. But I didn't attack first, and I only used the bare minimum of force necessary to defend myself and others. The policeman looked at him studiedly, then nodded. We'll check the tape. But I must say, not many people in your position would show such restraint. Marcus shifted his gaze to Chanel and Leah, who were testifying to another officer. I couldn't do otherwise. The next 2 hours passed in a surreal atmosphere as police officers interviewed witnesses, photographed the scene, and reviewed surveillance footage. The Valentino store had turned into a crime scene, with fence tape crisscrossing the entrance, preventing regular shoppers from going inside. Marcus was sitting in one of the folding chairs Tony usually put out for older customers. His groceries remained in the basket, forgotten in the commotion of the incident. He watched as the police officers led Scott out in handcuffs. He continued to snap and threaten, but now his words sounded hollow and powerless. Mr. Johnson? A police officer approached him, holding a clipboard. We've finished reviewing the video. Your statement is fully corroborated by the recording. You acted solely in self-defense and in defense of others. Marcus nodded, feeling the tension slowly leave his body. Thank you, officer. I'm glad no one was seriously injured. To tell you the truth, the officer lowered his voice, I'm impressed with your restraint. Most people in your position wouldn't be so careful. Marcus grinned bitterly. Most in my position can't afford to be careless, officer. A dark-skinned man using force, even in self-defense, is always a risk. The policeman was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. I understand. Sad, but true. At the other end of the store, Chanel was comforting Leah, who still looked shaken. Marcus noticed the girl furtively looking at him, with a mixture of fear and admiration in her eyes. Can I talk to them? He asked the officer. Sure. We've already taken their statements. Marcus slowly approached the mother and daughter, trying not to make any sudden movements. The last thing he wanted to do was scare a child who had already been through enough stress for one day. Hi, he said softly. How are you? Chanel looked up, and in her eyes Marcus saw a mixture of gratitude and weariness. Better than we could be, thanks to you. Thank you, Marcus. I don't know what we would have done if you hadn't been here. You would have made it, he said confidently. You're very brave. Leah, still clinging to her mother, asked quietly, Are you really a fighter? Marcus squatted down to be at the girl's eye level. Yes, I am a fighter. But you know what? Your mom was a lot braver today than I've ever been in the ring. Leah nodded seriously. Mom always says you have to stand up for yourself. And she's absolutely right, Marcus smiled. But that man was so mean, Leah frowned, remembering. Why did he yell at us like that? We didn't do anything to him. Marcus and Chanel exchanged quick glances. Here it was, the moment that comes sooner or later in every dark-skinned child's life. A conversation about hate, prejudice, and the unfairness of the world. Sometimes people are angry not because of what someone did, Marcus began cautiously, but because of what they think or feel. This man wasn't angry at you specifically. He was angry at people who look like us. Because of skin color? Leah looked puzzled. But that's silly. Yes, honey, it is silly. Chanel gently stroked her daughter's head. But some people think that way. It's important to remember, Marcus added, that most people aren't like that. Look at Tony, at those policemen, at the other shoppers. None of them agree with that person. They know it's not what you look like that matters. It's what kind of person you are. Leah thought for a moment, then nodded seriously. Like you. You're a good person, even though you look scary. Marcus couldn't hold back a laugh. Scary? Wow. Leah! Chanel looked embarrassed. You can't say that. It's okay. Marcus was still smiling. Honesty is a good thing. And you know what, Leah? In the ring, I do try to look scary. But in regular life, I'm just a regular guy who likes healthy food and occasionally helps people in stores. And beats up bad people, Leah added with unexpected enthusiasm. Leah, violence is not a solution to problems, Chanel said quickly, casting an apologetic glance at Marcus. Your mom's right, he nodded seriously. I had to use force today because there was no other option, but it's always better to solve problems with words and respect. Tony approached them, holding Chanel's grocery bags. Here are your purchases, ma'am. And I insist, no payment today. Tony, that's not necessary, Chanel began, but the store owner shook his head firmly. I insist. After what you've been through in my store, it's the least I can do. Thank you, Chanel said quietly, accepting the packages. And for you, Mr. Johnson, your groceries are ready too. Tony pointed to the packed bags by the register. Also on the house. I can't, Marcus began, but Tony interrupted him. You have protected the customers in my store. Please allow me to express my gratitude. Marcus realized it was useless to argue and nodded gratefully. The policeman who had spoken to Marcus earlier approached the group. Mrs. Williams, Mr. Johnson, I have some good news. The prosecutor has already reviewed the tape and witness statements. Scott Bennett has been charged with assault, disorderly conduct, and a hate crime. Given the video evidence and witnesses, the case looks very serious for him. Is he going to jail? Leah asked with childlike candor. The officer smiled softly at the girl. That's for the court to decide, sweetheart. But he will definitely face the consequences of his actions. When the police finally allowed them to leave the store, evening had already taken hold. Street lights illuminated Buffalo's sidewalks, and a cool October wind raced fallen leaves across the pavement. I'll walk you home, Marcus said as they stepped outside. That's really not necessary, Chanel started, but he shook his head firmly. After a day like this, I won't be able to practice in peace knowing you're walking home alone. Chanel looked like she was about to object, but then just nodded gratefully. Thank you. They walked in relative silence, Leah between them, holding both of their hands tightly. Despite the stress of the day, the girl seemed to be taking it as an adventure of sorts. Did you know I can count to 100 in Spanish? She said suddenly, looking at Marcus. Really? That's impressive. He was indeed impressed. Uno, dos, tres? Leah started, but Chanel stopped her gently. "Honey, maybe we shouldn't count all 100 right now." Marcus laughed. "Perhaps you can show me another time." "Promise?" Leah's eyes lit up with hope. "Will you come see us again?" Marcus cast a quick glance at Chanel, not wanting to promise something he couldn't fulfill. "Sure, if your mom doesn't mind," he said cautiously. "We'd be happy to," Chanel replied quietly. "After all you've done today, you'll always be welcome in our home." By the time they reached the modest two-story house on Maple Street, Leah had already begun to peck her nose, despite all the excitement of the day. "Here we are," Chanel said, stopping at the porch. "Thanks again for everything, Marcus. I don't know how we can repay you." "No repayment is necessary," Marcus shook his head. "I'm glad I was there for you in your time of need." "And yet," Chanel looked thoughtful, "you mentioned an important fight. When is it?" "The 23rd, 3 weeks from today." "Where will it be held?" "At the Key Bank Center Sports Complex here in Buffalo." Chanel nodded as if making some kind of decision. "We'll be there. I'll take the day off from both jobs and Leah and I will cheer you on." Marcus was touched by that promise. "You don't have to come at all." "We want to," Chanel said softly but firmly. "Today you showed Leah what it means to be a real hero, not a comic book superhero, but a real person who stands up for what's right. That's a lesson worth reinforcing." Marcus felt something warm spill into his chest. He had always trained for wins, for titles and recognition, but today he realized that there were things far more important than professional achievements. "Then I'll be waiting for you in the stands," he said. "I'll book the best seats for you." 3 weeks flew by in intense training. Marcus worked harder than ever before. The incident at the store, oddly enough, had given him new motivation. He was no longer fighting just for himself or his career. He now knew that there would be those among the spectators for whom his victory would mean more than just a sporting achievement. The story of what happened at Valentino's quickly spread around town, first through the local news, then through social media. Scott Bennett was charged with not only assault but also a hate crime, greatly increasing the potential punishment. Tony Valentino gave several interviews in which he called Marcus a hero. Marcus himself tried to stay out of the media frenzy. When reporters tried to get a comment from him, he would only briefly say, "I did what any decent person would do." However, unlike most media stories that fade quickly, this one lived on. It touched a nerve in society, reminding us of the racial issues that still existed in so-called post-racial America. On social media, people shared their stories of discrimination and instances where outsiders intervened or stood idly by. Chanel, to her surprise, became part of this conversation as well. Several local activists approached her about speaking at a community meeting. At first, she declined, not wanting even more attention, but then she realized that her story could help others. "Mom, you have to tell them," Leah said with the childlike wisdom that sometimes trumps adult wisdom. "So the bad people know they can't intimidate us." And Chanel agreed. She spoke at the meeting, speaking not so much about Scott's hatred but about Marcus's courage, Tony's kindness, and the support of the police officers who took the incident seriously. "We often focus on the negative," she concluded, "but that day I saw a lot more good than evil, and that gives me hope." The evening of the fight came cold but clear. Key Bank Center was filled to capacity. Marcus's fight was the main event of the evening, and the excitement around it was unusually high. Chanel and Leah sat in the front row, taking the seats Marcus had personally reserved for them. Leah held up a homemade banner that read, "Marcus Johnson is a true hero." Chanel was almost as nervous as if she was stepping into the ring herself. "Mommy, is he gonna win?" Leah asked as the arena lights began to dim, signaling the start of the main event. "I don't know, honey," Chanel answered honestly. "But that's not what matters. What matters is that he's already won the fight that really matters." When Marcus appeared under the spotlight, the crowd erupted in applause. His journey to the ring was longer and more solemn than usual. Placards with his name and words of encouragement flashed everywhere. As he walked past the front row, he stopped for a moment and looked directly at Chanel and Leah. Leah waved her placard and Marcus smiled, saluting her with a slight bow. The fight was a tough one. Marcus's opponent, a fighter from California with an impressive record, was just as motivated. They traded punches, held throws, and takedowns, each looking for a weakness in the other's defense. After 2 rounds of evenly matched fighting, Marcus looked tired. A black eye was filling up under his eye, and he was breathing heavily in his corner. "Is he losing?" Leah asked in a whisper, looking worriedly at her mother. "Not necessarily," Chanel replied, though she was worried herself. "The fight isn't over yet." Before the 3rd round began, Marcus suddenly looked in their direction. Leah raised her banner higher, and something changed in his eyes. He straightened up, took a deep breath, and stepped into the middle of the ring with renewed determination when the gong sounded. What happened in the next 2 minutes would later be called one of the most impressive comebacks in Buffalo MMA history by commentators. Marcus moved with renewed energy. His punches were accurate and powerful, and his defense seemed impenetrable. When an accurate right kick sent his opponent to the mat, the arena exploded with screams. The referee started the count, but it was obvious that the fighter would not go up to 10. "Victory by knockout, Marcus Johnson," announced the commentator, and the crowd went wild. Leah was jumping for joy, and Chanel couldn't hold back the tears. This wasn't just a victory for an athlete. It was the victory of a man who, 3 weeks ago, had risked everything to protect strangers from hatred and aggression. After the result was announced and the belt was awarded, Marcus walked to the edge of the ring directly across from where Chanel and Leah were sitting. He leaned over and held out his hand to them. "Come up here," he said with a smile. The security guards helped them climb into the ring, and the commentator, realizing that something special was happening, handed Marcus a microphone. "I want to introduce you to 2 very special people," Marcus said, addressing the audience. "Chanel and Leah Williams. They reminded me what I'm really fighting for, not just in the ring, but in life." The crowd greeted them with applause, many already knowing the story from the news. "We often talk about strength, about courage, about fighting," Marcus continued. "But real courage is standing up for the truth even when you're scared. Real strength is defending those who are weaker, even when it's risky. And true struggle is to strive for a world where no one will be judged by the color of their skin or their background." Chanel stood beside him, holding Leah's hand, and felt tears running down her cheeks. Not tears of fear or sadness like that day at the store, but tears of pride and hope. Marcus raised Chanel and Leah's hands along with his own, symbolizing their shared victory. And in that moment, they weren't just casual acquaintances bound by an unpleasant incident. They were a symbol of what can happen when people unite against hate and prejudice. The crowd chanted Marcus's name, but he knew that this victory didn't just belong to him. It belonged to all those who face prejudice every day and confront it with dignity and courage. It belonged to Chanel, who defended her daughter. It belonged to Leah, who, despite her young age, understood the value of justice. And that was the most important victory, not the title or the belt, but the understanding that true strength comes from unity and mutual support.